my feeling is that anybody working in government that is not doing something that is related to this is not doing their job. This is the big one coming at us, with us, and a big challenge for us in the scenario planning community. This is who I am. I have a number of positions in the University of Oxford, which is a delightful place to work in, and a great privilege to have you visit anytime you want to my team and myself. The approach that we've developed with Angela Wilkinson, who used to be here, is now at the World Energy Council, is in this book, Strategic Reframing. There's a translation into Spanish on it, El Replanteamiento Estratégico. And a summary of the approach was published in 2017 in the MIT Sloan Management Review, comparing the future of the field of chemistry with the way that Rolls-Royce, the people that make engines for airplanes, used it. And it's a very adaptable methodology that can fit into intergovernmental organizations, governments, cities, fields of scientific fields, companies, NGOs, et cetera, et cetera. This is some of the work that our alumni has done. Recent work on the future of the Ukraine with the Interparliamentary Group of Future Generations in the UK Parliament with the Ukrainian Parliament. The reference Foresight scenarios of the EU was done by alumni of the program. The handover between two presidents of the European Patent Office was the scenario planning work they did. The guidance notes of how to use Foresight in the IMF, and so on and so forth. So we produce or help people that are doing wonderful work, and we're very proud of the product, which is better scenario planners, which over the 20 years we've run the program have done great stuff. Now, this is something that is a bit over 2 years ago. Al Jazeera published this, and 15 days later, the opposite happened. And one of the questions we have as scenario planners is which of the situations are we in today that are equivalent to the February 2022 situation of being sure that something will not happen, and it does happen, and it happens sooner than expected. The reason that these expectations, such as no, Russia will not invade Ukraine, matter is that there's a correlation between failed strategies and misleading prejudgments. This is a book looking at failed strategies, and if you have the wrong prejudgment, then your strategy or your policy is going to go wrong. And so our job is to find out what are the prejudgments that are being made today, and we do that by putting ourselves in a future perspective to do that. The article that we published this winter, three months ago, in again MIT Sloan Management Review, suggests very strongly that scenario planning is already being done implicitly by whomever you're serving. It is not something that you have to bring in as a new policy. The whole picture here is given away by the little red line at the bottom. It's not only the horse, but it's somebody writing. And the insight is that you cannot look at the context of your policy and the future context of your policy at the same time you look at the policy. So what we people in Foresight do is to invite people to stop looking at the policy and to look at the context of the policy, and particularly the context of the policy once the policy is up and running, which we can imagine, and then come back to see if the policy is still fit for purpose. There is a steep rise of interest in scenario planning. I joined Oxford where the green line and the red line meet, but the difference is not because of me. I was just lucky in terms of timing. This was because of 9/11 and then a number of uncertainties. It became quite clear that scenario planning is on its rise. These days, there's about almost 250 articles written every year. I don't read all of them, but I sort of keep pace with what's happening. And the way we think about this is a scenario is something that will happen to your context independent of what you do. Within that context, there's a set of options, and then strategy or policy is what you choose to do within the options. And of course, if you have 2 or 3 different scenarios, you will have 2 or 3 different sets of options, and then you'll have to determine which set of options you put into your strategy or your policy. The big conundrum methodologically, and I'm going to touch on that quickly, is that the users are the people on the left, and the scenario planner is the creature on the right. And the creature on the right does not work in offices. It has its eyes on its side. It has peripheral vision. It has big ears to listen to weak signals. And what all of the multidimensionality that the hair attends to has to be converted into material that the users can use, typically using 2-dimensional media such as the screen that we're sharing, or Word, or that wonderful technology called Excel, which the hair does not know how to use. And a lot of the methodological conundrums is how you get that multidimensionality brought to be useful to the users on the left. What we do in principle is straightforward, is we look at the way we look at things. I have eyeglasses, and instead of looking at the OECD from the point of view of April 2024, I might invent a point of view in April 2030 or 2035, and then look back from that point of view to how I'm looking at things today, and look at a difference in point of view between a future perspective invented for a purpose and a user rather than the current way of looking at it. So we look at the way we look at things. And in principle, we start always with the learner, the user here now in their strategic situation in a big, turbulent, uncertain, novel and ambiguous context. Then we take them into this green space where we create points of view that are useful to assess the assumptions in the learner's perspective. And then with those eyeglasses, we come back and look at the here and now and say, so what that happens. That's in principle the methodology. And I was asked to talk about how we make that rigorous in a social science perspective. Given that I work in the best university in the world, the methodology we have to have has to be rigorous intellectually. So there's 3 elements here that matter. I'll walk through them very, very quickly. The first one is the turbulent causal texture, going back to a 1965 paper by Fred Emery, Australian, Eric Trist, Scottish. And they were the first people to theorize the context of an organization. And they came with the idea of turbulence as a causal texture. And that's a very big basis upon which our methodology is based. And this is that we are not doing scenarios on the future of a particular organization. We're doing scenarios on the context of that organization. So it's the context of the user. One of the big mistakes I've seen in government and in intergovernmental organizations is that they think that this scenario for the department or the ministry or the city, it's not, it's for the business context or the transactional environment context in which they do things. And why does this matter? This is from my friend Cho Kong, who was the chief political scientist at Shell for many years. He always uses this example. This is one view of the pyramids at Giza in Egypt, and this is the other view of them. And you can see the city of Cairo just about as close as you can without this view being ruined for the tourists and the people that will be visiting. But the reality is that the context is very, very different from what you're given. So you're always looking for the context of the context or whatever it is you're looking, and you're looking at this from the future. This is an article that my colleague Trudy Lang and Richard Whittington, both of them on the same corridor as me at Oxford, wrote in the Harvard Business Review, which is not only that you have to have a longer term view, is you have to have a broader view of the context in which your policy or planning sits. A second big piece on our methodology is radical uncertainty. You can go back to Frank Knight in 1921 and the difference between risk and uncertainty that he brought up. More recently, a very nice book is by John Kay and Mervyn King on radical uncertainty is sort of sets that up in a more recent perspective. And that means this is a part of the future that for which forecasting is unreliable or impossible. And you have to work with that part of the future doing scenario planning. If you can forecast it, and then do that. But if you can't, And so it's not in the risk registry that what we work with is beyond the risk registry. There's two ways, and you can make yourself appealing. One is you can put Chanel number 5 on yourself, and another one is to put numbers into your model. And in lots of policy situations, you have to put numbers into your scenarios. As long as you don't put a probability to the scenarios, that's fine. You might say the price of oil in this scenario will be between this amount and that amount, and in a second scenario will be a different amount. That's fine. You can even put probabilities of somebody being elected in one scenario and a different probability in another scenario, but you cannot put probabilities into the scenarios because of radical uncertainty. Then the third item is the notion of time. In Oxford, we work in English. I'm working in French this afternoon, but the issues are quite similar. The Oxford English Dictionary says that time is not something you go into with your plans. It's something that comes to you. A time to come that is expected to be different. So if we work with the future, as the Oxford English Dictionary states, we work with the future for the present, and the strategy is working into the future from the present. And we have to have a conversation between the time to come, which we work with. We work with the future, strategists work for the future. And we have to make these two things talk to each other. So the methodology is based on these three things coming together. And that means that you start with this broad view of the factors that are beyond the actors that the learner, which it might be your minister or your strategy or your policy team, deals with. Everybody in the black team is somebody that they can shake hands with. It's an actor, and that they can touch. And the strategies are always in relation to these actors: a competitive strategy, supply chain strategy, employee relation strategy, customer retention strategy, investor relation strategy, etc., are all in there. But beyond that, there's a bunch of factors with which you cannot shake hands. And the factors can come together and support the black circle, or come together and transform the black circle. So the inquiry starts there. It moves into then what kind of actor system would be logical to expect should different factors come together in different ways than they currently do, and then ends up with, what kind of strategic optionality would be wise to build in, or things that you're now working on should be abandoned. And so the distinctive characteristics of our methodology are on thinking of the user not as a decision maker, but as a learner. If they don't want to learn, don't do it because it won't work. And it's also because of the environment being specific to somebody. The scenarios are for one purpose at a time. You cannot do scenarios for everybody. People do that, and they do that for marketing reasons and so on and so forth, but not in the methodology that we have. We're trying to be useful to somebody rather than to produce truthful guesses of what's going to happen. We work with plausibility, not probability, and it's an iterative process of learning, reframing, and reperceiving different situations for that user and that policymaker in these tuna conditions. So for us, scenarios are set out like this, and you start at the bottom right, not at the top left, which is if you don't have a user and a use, the whole thing's going to be useless. And if it's going to be useless, it's going to be considered expensive. And then the whole methodology, not just what you did this time, is considered to be rubbish. And then you don't do it again for a long time. So if you don't have a user and a use and a purpose for that user, don't do it, because it'll give everybody pain and a waste of money. And sometimes in governments, it takes years to get that use and user clear. And that's part of your job. It's not somebody else's job to do. And then you do a set of scenarios manufactured for that use, that purpose, that user, and so on. And so you create alternatives to the black circle by looking at different combinations of the blue circle, which can come in as purple, red, or pink in this diagram. And then the question is whether the strategy you have for the black circle is still robust for the different circles that you could be having coming to you very quickly. They always come in sets. The work on the left was with the IMF, the work on the right by an alumnus working the World Economic Forum on the future of the global financial system back in 2008, 2009 during the crisis. The idea is that you have different perspectives to the one that you have today and different from each other. And it's the different perspectives that give you insights as to what assumptions you have been holding dear that you could let go of or question as you go forward, so that you don't end up with misleading prejudgments and therefore rubbish strategies or policies. And so the strategy or policy interfaces between what you do and the context. The scenarios are between the contextual environment and the context. And the scenarios frame the strategy, not the other way around. In terms of getting deeper into the methodology, you have to be clear on what you mean by time and what does your customer mean by time and how they know about the time. This morning, it was a very interesting article in the FT about the change of time in the world is now being delayed. They were going to change clocks by 1 second, and the melting of the ice is slowing down the rotation of the Earth. So maybe we don't need to slow down rotation by 1 second. And so we have a view that the learner is looking at the context from within the screen, and we in Oxford sit outside the screen looking at the way they look at their context. And as Foresight people, we are all looking at the way that the learner looks, but the learner is not looking at the way they look. They're looking at what they look at. So you have to go back and forth from these perspectives. Why does this matter? Because you get a view like this. This might be the policy, but from a very different perspective, it looks like this. And so it's the same building, but from a totally different point of view. And our job is to change the point of view and look at the context of the policy as implemented and to see it differently. So my colleague, Cynthia Celine from the Arizona State University and I wrote a paper about, we think of the scenario space of the future as a teddy bear, because we have to think about the different topologies available to the user within their orange view of the black circle and even of the blue circle. It's not a cone, and many of the views that are sent out by consultants in particular, but also by users trained particularly in economics and political science, think of the future as a cone. And our question is, how the hell do they know it's a cone? And the reason they use a cone is that they have a positivist epistemology, whereas our epistemology is phenomenological. And we've actually worked, these articles we've written on getting positivist scientists to work with us with a phenomenological epistemology on the future of their field, and then come back to being positivists in the way going ahead. So if you run into people that are positivists in their training and in their work, your job as a Foresight person is to invite them to be phenomenological for the time that they're working with you. And it's possible to do that. Some articles about this that I will not touch on, I can come back to them. So scenarios are vehicles to surface and question assumptions, particularly of the models people have in their heads or explicitly as models. They're not counterfactuals within the models. They're not model runs, preferences, forecasts, projections, or predictions. They're vehicles for learning. This is a piece of work I was involved in. You know, what kind of company invents a future for which there's four profit warnings? There was a fifth one afterwards. They were inventing a company for a future that failed to arrive and got into trouble. And that's why they ended up doing scenario planning. Whenever you see profit warnings, it's that they did not imagine the future they ended up in, and they were not doing foresight the way that ought to be done. If you do foresight, it's not a guarantee that you will not have a profit warning, but it is a way of ensuring that there's fewer of them going forward. And you have situations like this: French ski resorts forever due to lack of snow, because this is happening. And then the question is, what are you doing as Foresight people about this going forward? Scenarios are not forecasts, but they can work alongside forecasts. They are not about data, facts, predictions. They're about surfacing assumptions, structured fictions that are purposeful, plausible for somebody, and once they're used can be disposable. Thank you very much.